back like we never left. It's Double Move Sports. As always, you got Big Baby Stef here. I'm also here with the fantasy phenom, Alex Lott. And it's still Dynasty season. We're getting closer to redraft, but we need to do a little temperature check on a few of the values of some high-end running backs, some flex range wide receivers that are kind of some polarizing names. But Alex, I'm just excited to talk Dynasty. You know, I know for us now, our bread and butter is Dynasty, trades, startups, values. If you want to join a league with us, hit that Discord link, free to join in the description down below. Just went through our recent startup review, going through a lot of the values, who are the guys that were great picks, who were some of the reaches in that draft, and we flamed a few of the guys in the league. So if you're trying to get flamed, if you're trying to put your money where your mouth is, join up with us. But Alex, you ready to talk a little more Dynasty before July and it's full redraft?
Some people were coming to their defense in the Discord after that last video we posted of that startup review. But no, the Discord's been great lately. I mean, I know it's kind of the dead zone of football season. We're starting to get some mini camp reports, and, you know, Leonard Fournette came in looking huge, like he just ate a couple Big Macs, and we're seeing Matt Ryan is lighting it up at the Colts. So all sorts of rumors and things are flying out there. Most of it is just noise. I think people are just like desperate to get any kind of football news and action right now. So we're going to break down some polarizing players. That's a good name for this episode. We could call it polarizing players. We could call it heat check. We could call it whatever we want. But these are guys that in most dynasty leagues, it's like half the league is just totally out, don't want to touch them with a 10-foot pole, no interest at all. Then half the league is like, hey, I want to take this opportunity if someone's out on this guy and buy low and hope that they have this bounce back in value or this rise in value. So these guys are polarizing a lot of fun names on this list, and I'm hyped to get into these.
So let's start today's breakdowns with Saquon Barkley. And you're going to see a recurring theme on a couple of the guys that we talk about today. And I've even executed a couple of trades this morning, 2 trades this morning in 2 different DMS leagues, actually moving some of the guys we're going to talk about. But a lot of it comes down to what is your injury tolerance? And with Saquon Barkley, it seems like that's really the question. Right now on Keep Trade Cut, going as the RB11. And I'd say for me, I'm probably in line with the ADP. You can look back at the RB1 Dynasty rankings we did a couple weeks ago. I think if anything right now, Saquon is a buy. Based on where he's going in startups, I got him at the 409 in a recent startup. RB16 off the board. We were talking about taking him a whole round earlier, but we've seen this happen from the likes of Joe Mixon, Dalvin Cook. When these running backs have an injury-washed season in their prime, people get fantasy PTSD, and I certainly get it, but I'm the type of guy, I still want that upside. I want that upside on my roster. I want the chance that I get that player back fully healthy and ready to produce big numbers. Saquon comes into 2022, now almost 2 years removed from the torn ACL he suffered in week 2 of 2020. We saw him in 2021. He rolled his ankle in the Dallas game, played on it the back half of the season. Even if you take that game out of his averages, he was still seeing 5 targets a game. Why I love Saquon so much is that he is the best version of the pass catching running back in the NFL, and he can do it all. His first 2 seasons, over 1,000 rushing yards in a brutal New York Giants offense led by Daniel Jones. He finished as an RB1 his first 2 years, and then after that, it's just been this injury impact on him. But Alex, where are you at on Saquon?
I think I'm with you. I know, some of the guys we talk about in this polarizing players heat check series, we're going to have some disagreements on, but with Saquon, I agree with you. Keep trade cut, he is at running back 11. At least, those are dynamic. Those are changing. But today, he's RB11. And we say that not because we follow keep trade cut and use that as like our guideline for rankings or values or anything like that.
Too many hot takes in there.
Never do that. But it does present a good opportunity to get crowdsourced real data on where the dynasty community as an overall average values a player. So while Saquon is RB11 on Keep Trade Cut, I think that's fair. You're saying that's fair. The reason that this is an opportunity is because whoever has him in your league might not agree. Whoever has him in your league might be scared. Whoever has him in your league might value him more like RB 18 to 20 because you said it best. These Joe Mixon, Dalvin Cook type guys who have been hurt a couple years in a row and burned you. Christian McCaffrey is another example. His value has been depressed a little bit in some of these leagues. And Saquon is just another example of that. So if you are in on Saquon, which I think you and I are, it's a good opportunity to just go send out some feelers and see how low you can really buy him. And I agree with you that he is a premier running back when we've seen him healthy. I think you can throw 2021 out the window because he's coming off the ACL. 2020, the ACL, that sucks. We've seen plenty of running backs come back from ACLs and be just fine. So for Saquon, he was getting a slow ramp up in week 1 and then week 2 through 4. That's the only time we saw him fully healthy in 2021. And in week 2 through 4, he had over 80% of the snaps. You said it, 5 targets a game, 14 carries in those games, and 19 fantasy points per game. So that was like kind of the Saquon of old. Then he does have the freak ankle injury where he rolls it after the play. And in the final 8 games, he was not that efficient, but he was still seeing the volume. He came back and finished the year with the 14 carries, with the 4.5 targets a game. And he was never really 100% himself after that injury. And the thing we have to remember, people are going to look at Saquon and say, oh, he sucked at the end of the year, wasn't efficient. He gets hurt every time. He's not going to be good. Mike Glennon and Jake Fromm started, or some combination of those two guys were playing quarterback for the Giants in the last 6 games of the season. So 6 of those 8 games when Saquon came back, this offense was absolutely atrocious. And in week 17 against the Chicago Bears, the New York Giants had -6 passing yards in the game. And this is what Saquon was dealing with last season. So he's still only going to be 25 years old this year, should have another several years of elite production. I know the contract is going to start to become in question because he is getting close to the end of that rookie deal. But I'm saying it, if someone in your league is lower than consensus on Saquon, creates a perfect time to buy. And I love what you did in that startup draft, getting him in the back of the 4th round.
That first-round draft capital that he got as a top 5 pick off the board is going to inflate his value as far as how the NFL perceives him, I believe, because he's an unrestricted free agent after this year. I think he could end up in a better situation at 26 years old with a skill set that's been proven in the passing game, proven on the ground. Saquon and Christian McCaffrey are the big swings that you can take in dynasty startups or in trade to just push all your chips in, especially if you're a contending roster, since these guys are past that 24.8-year-old age apex. But if you look at the situation right now, we got Daniel Jones returning, which is unfortunate. I know Brian Dable was brought in, and they've decided against taking the 5th-year option on Danny Dimes. So he's entering his 4th and final year of his rookie contract. And Brian Dable, if you have tracked his career at all, last 4 seasons with the Buffalo Bills, he's known as the Josh Allen whisperer, the guy who fixed Josh Allen's throwing motion. They run a very up-tempo offense in Buffalo. They run a lot of 4 wide receiver sets. And the wide receiver group in New York really doesn't scare me too much for Saquon. We saw him get the volume last year. I think he's going to continue to get that, even with Daniel Jones having his own rushing capability. But I think we have to admit the offense is capping the ceiling for Saquon Barkley. Good news is, though, this could be a year away from turnover in that offense to where it's a much better situation if he's still in New York, or Saquon says, look, I'm tired of being on this horrible offense with a horrible offensive line, getting decked behind the line of scrimmage on most of my carries. Let me go to a situation with a contender with a great offensive line where I can help compete. And I think if you're an NFL team, if you're a GM that signs Saquon Barkley, you know what you're getting out of him, assuming he is healthy in 2022. So that's why I'm willing to invest in Dynasty. But Alec, let's shift over to another guy coming off another injury wash season, didn't play a snap in the regular season, and J.K. Dobbins right now going as the keep trade cut RB14 after a season with a preseason ACL tear. What's your take on J.K. Dobbins right now? Are you buying or are you selling?
I'm worried. I'm selling. I think I love J.K. Dobbins as a player. I love his profile, but I'm just worried at this value, man. I mean, RB14, you're banking on a lot of things to happen for J.K. Dobbins that I don't think we can really look at his current situation and project out, because he's still young, 23 years old, which is great. But coming off that torn ACL, again, we just talked about it with Saquon Barkley, and a torn ACL for running back isn't the end of the world, but he is going to ramp up probably slowly this season. We saw Saquon get slowly ramped into this offense, to his offense in 2021. We could see a similar path for J.K. Dobbins in 2022. So I do worry about the upside from that perspective. But I really, with J.K. Dobbins, it just comes down to the receiving upside. The receiving upside will always and forever hinder J.K. Dobbins in Dynasty. so long as the Ravens are running this system with Lamar Jackson at quarterback. Because if you look at the Ravens for the past 3 seasons, in 2021, they were 30th in targets to the running back. In 2020, they were 31st in targets to the running back. And in 2019, they were 31st in targets to the running back. Lamar Jackson just does not throw the ball to the running back. We often see that from mobile quarterbacks. They get outside the pocket. They don't need to dump it off because they can run. And I don't see that changing anytime soon for this Ravens offense. And the interesting thing is J.K. Dobbins himself is a fine pass catcher. He showed enough pass catching chops in college at Ohio State, but the Ravens just aren't going to switch their offense and suddenly utilize the running back in the pass game. And unless that happens, the upside is just so capped for J.K. Dobbins. So if we're saying he's not going to have receiving upside, to me, you are relying on J.K. Dobbins becoming this Nick Chubb type running back, which is certainly possible. And Nick Chubb has to have 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns in a season to be a top 10 running back. So for J.K. Dobbins, if you're relying on him to have to get 1,200 yards, to have to get 10 touchdowns, and an offense that still will utilize Gus Edwards, I mean, Tyler Beatty's there. They drafted him late. Don't expect him to do much. But Lamar Jackson's also going to take about 1,000 yards and 5-6 touchdowns a season at minimum at the quarterback spot. So when you're relying on J.K. Dobbins to suddenly be this Nick Chubb type workhorse and not even have that top 5 upside, that's where I'm a little bit concerned about him from a dynasty perspective. Could be a player that's good for a really long time. I think he is a fantastic running back, but in dynasty, I just don't know if I want to pay RB14 type prices for a guy who's probably going to be a mid to high end RB2 at best for the most, for the majority of his career.
I'm in on this RB14 price a little bit more than you are, but there is a cap in this Ravens offense for at least 2 more years on Dobbins' rookie deal. And here's my concern. I think if Dobbins doesn't produce this year, people are going to sour on him quick because he was, getting ramped up as a rookie, showed flashes, the excitement was there, didn't play year 2. And now it's like, when are we going to start to see some of that proof in the pudding that we've seen from Nick Chubb? It's taken Nick Chubb 3 years of RB1 production to be viewed as a top 5 name, and he's already creeping out of RB1 status because he's 25 years old, past that age apex. So it's almost like we have to see it from Dobbins this year, and if we don't, people aren't going to be buying. With him being 23 years old, though, it is still exciting. There's runway for Dobbins, and certainly the high-scoring and efficient Ravens rushing attack is exciting. Alex, I'm curious to play a little comparison game here. Travis Etienne or J.K. Dobbins, 2 guys that are coming off of seasons that they missed.
I'd rather have ETN. And it's funny, that's a perfect name to start with because the toughest thing for me with J.K. Dobbins is that a lot of the guys going around that RB14 range in dynasty value, I would rather have than Dobbins. Like if I am a contender, I would rather have Nick Chubb right now. I'd rather have Kamara. I'd rather have even a Josh Jacobs or an Aaron Jones. But if I'm rebuilding, I'd probably rather have ETN, Cam Akers, Kenneth Walker, future firsts. So to me, Dobbins is kind of stuck in this in-between where he's going around these veteran names that I'd much prefer in a contending roster, and then he's also going around some of these more unproven names that I'd probably prefer in a rebuilding roster. So he's kind of stuck in the middle, don't really know what to do with him. I think he's going to be a fine producer as an RB2, but I'd much rather put all my chips in one way or another if I'm really going to pick a side in a dynasty league.
So let's keep going down our list. We've talked about Saquon. We've talked about Dobbins. Let's talk about a wide receiver that's not flirting with this top tier, and it's Darnell Mooney, another guy that's been looked at as an extremely polarizing pick in dynasty startups. I've seen him go from everywhere from a mid-range wide receiver 2 to a low-end wide receiver 3. It just seems like some guys are all in on Mooney based on what he did in 2021, which was certainly impressive. 26.7% target share, which was 11th in the NFL, 140 targets, 1,055 yards, was 13th in air yards. So certainly I think there is a lot to like. And I think with Mooney, he's a guy that I love in certain roster builds. I love him in best ball for this year. On Underdog, I'm taking him everywhere. But to me, he's very similar to like a Devonta Smith, where I just don't want to buy right now when he's in this target funnel situation and his value is projected to be higher than it's ever been, because we saw what happened to Devonta Smith. Smitty got A.J. Brown. He got A.J. Brown, and that's the concern with me for Mooney, where we don't know, is he a certified alpha wide receiver 1 in the NFL? I know he plays on the outside. He's kind of that field stretcher plus type role. But in an offense that's absolutely brutal in Chicago, Is that something I want to invest in long term? I think for me, Mooney's a guy that I love a lot more in redraft because there's no one else for Fields to throw to than I do in Dynasty.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point. I think the Devontae Smith comp is good, but I think the difference is if we're talking this time next year, I think there is a chance Mooney's value is lower because they will bring in next offseason a top rookie or a free agent name. They got to bring in another wide receiver in some way, shape, or form. But for this season, you mentioned a redraft. I like him a lot. He's going to have his value increase. I really think wide receiver 32 right now, there's a ton of wide receivers in that range that people view similarly, but Mooney should be a lock for 140 plus targets this year. That's what he got last year. I don't see it going down. So to me, I just think that Mooney, as we see this season progress, he's going to be the clear one. He's going to be getting targets. He's going to be having these pop games with, 100 plus yards. And I think his value will increase by the end of the season. Now, the key is going to be at the end of the season, you're going to have to make a decision. Do you want to go ahead and move on from Darnell Mooney when his value is probably at its peak? Or do you want to take the bet that even if they do bring in someone else, he remains to be that wide receiver one? So that's the tough thing with Mooney. With the Bears last season, I mean, they were 30th in yards per game, only 188 passing yards per game last season, which is brutal. And Mooney had a 26% target share of that small, inefficient pie that they produced. So for Mooney, wide receivers deep in this area, I like taking a shot on him. I think there's a lot of receivers that are getting more hype right now. Mike Williams, Cortland Sutton, two guys in that range I would definitely prefer.
I'm buying Sutton everywhere right now.
Yeah, but I think, Elijah Moore and Amon-Ra St. Brown are in that range as well. And I think those guys are getting a lot more hype than Darnell Mooney, but I don't necessarily think they're in a tier above Darnell Mooney. So if you can trade in Elijah Moore or in Amon-Ra St. Brown and you can pick up Darnell Mooney plus, I think that's a move you should be making. But I think it's a fine value. I like him as a player. But to your point, I think in Dynasty, there are some long-term concerns just about him not being that true number one in Chicago over the course of his entire career.
Now, head coach Matt Eberflus, who was brought in from your Indianapolis Colts as defensive coordinator for the last couple of years, he said they're building the offense around Justin Fields, and we did see Fields have strong rapport with Darnell Mooney. I know Allen Robinson was banged up for pretty much all of last year. I don't know. It doesn't even really get me excited. Fields hasn't shown a ton. The offensive line is still brutal in Chicago. They're not giving Fields the best chance to produce right out of the gate, and we've seen that kind of crush quarterback production long-term from these rookies. And then you have to take into account this is Matt Eberflus's first head coaching job in the NFL or at the college level. So I don't know if there's necessarily a ton that we can draw from or bank on. It's not like a Mike Tomlin. It's not like an Andy Reid. It's not a Sean McVay that we can say, okay, this is a QB whisperer. He's going to make this offense hum. We don't know what Matt Eberflus is going to do. And they bring in Luke Getsy as the offensive coordinator. He spent the last 3 seasons as the Packers QB coach, also was their passing game coordinator last year. I don't have a ton of faith in this coaching staff to get the best thing out of Fields or even build an offense that's going to be up-tempo, passing the ball a lot. I think they're more than likely going to lean into the rushing and the conservative play. They're going to be a ground-and-pound team more likely than they're going to be an air-it-out passing attack. And so my concern with Mooney isn't his production. It's not even his ability. It's that this offense could completely turn over. This front office could turn over again in a couple years. And Fields may not even be the starter in a year or two. He may be taking that Tua Tagovailoa route where there's a lot of question marks now in year 3, year 4. And I don't believe we've seen it from Mooney consistently enough yet for him to be this stud alpha wide receiver one that has some insulation like we're seeing with the Deontay Johnson right now, where he's still the outside receiver. There's questions, but hey, we can bank on the offense being somewhat productive. We can bank on the stud over 30% target share he got last year. We haven't seen that level of production from Darnell Mooney yet, and that's not enough for me to kind of fade some of these concerns.
We got Deebo Samuel next, and I know Deebo Samuel had the big breakout season in 2021. He was a polarizing player before the 2021 season, and he clearly rose to the occasion. He's been a popular, conversation topic in terms of a potential trade. Now it's looking like he's going to stay in San Francisco. A lot of turnover there as well, especially at the quarterback position. Looks like Trey Lance is going to get the starting job. So, Steph, we're at this point with Deebo Samuel. Keep Trade Cut has him at wide receiver 8, which is crazy high. But we're at this point where you kind of have to pick. Are you in or are you out with Deebo? Deebo's a guy who finished last season as the wide receiver 3, still only 26 years old. So, Steph, where are you at with Deebo Samuel and his current value as the 8th wide receiver in these dynasty communities per keep trade cut?
Well, you and I had him at wide receiver 11, which isn't a big fall from that wide receiver 8. But the way I'm looking at Deebo is that he's at peak value right now. Unless I'm an all-in contender, I'm looking to sell him. I would love to sell Deebo for Courtland Sutton and a second-round pick to bolster our roster in most scenarios, right? It was like Deebo was this kind of later round, less sexy name after being treated as a check down monster, right? His ADOT was like -1 yards in 2020, comes into 2021, gets used on the ground a ton. His ADOT completely shifts. Ayuk seems to be out of the picture. It just feels like something's got to give with Deebo Samuel right now. He's at peak value coming off that monster year, and there's so many unknowns now between the contract situation. There were rumors that the Jets and the Texans were targeting Deebo aggressively in trade this offseason. We did see Deebo show up to mandatory minicamp, but he kind of had his back against the wall because if he'd skipped camp, he gets fined almost $100,000 for every day that he doesn't show up. So it's kind of like he has to be there or else he gets in big financial trouble. But there's word, and where a lot of this holdout buzz is coming from, is that Deebo doesn't want to be used as a runner on the ground the way he did last year to preserve his own health. And he wants to get paid to do both jobs if he's still going to be asked to do that. So you add some of the issues where like Deebo himself and his situation seems like something there isn't congruent for Deebo. And then Trey Lance bringing question marks to the offense. This is clearly an offense that wants to run the ball. They drafted the 3rd running back in 2 years in the draft. We know San Francisco is a run-first team in the Shanahan offense. They're in the bottom 5 pretty much every single year in terms of pass attempts. Kittle's still there. You and I both like Brandon Ayuk. And at 26 years old, Deebo's not exactly a spring chicken anymore. I think a lot of people think of him as being 23, 24. He came in after 4 years in college because he was not an early declare. The weird thing for me with Deebo that I can't seem to get over is it feels like his role has changed every single year. So now with Trey Lance and all these question marks, what does Deebo's role look like? And if I can in Dynasty, I'd rather just sell that unknown, get a little bit younger, get a little bit more higher upside with high A-dot receiver. I'd love to buy low on a DK Metcalf right now. I mentioned Courtland Sutton as another name. There's a lot of very strong upside pieces that you can go out and acquire in Dynasty and get some additional draft compensation back for Deebo Samuel right now because he's coming off that monster year that I don't know if is necessarily repeatable, either because he doesn't want to run the ball or the offense as a whole is changing.
I agree. I think you got to sell him. And I like Deebo. I do. He's an amazing player. He's going to have those pop weeks where he does crazy stuff after the catch. I mean, last year he proved to me he's one of the most electric players in the NFL. Not the same style, as Tyreek Hill doesn't do it the same way, but he is one of the very few players, like I can count him on one hand, that when he gets the ball, you're like, he might score no matter where he is, no matter how many defenders are around him. But you laid it out. It's going to be near impossible for Deebo Samuel to have as good of a season as he had in 2020. One is the supplementation through the running game. I mean, he had 8 rushing touchdowns last year. So he might get 1 or 2 in 2022 if he's used on an end around here or there, or maybe as an occasional carry, but like he's not getting 8 rushing touchdowns, maybe 1 or 2. And then if you think about the passing game, he was hyper targeted early in the season when Brandon Ayuk, through the first 6 games of their season, was getting 2 targets a game and was barely being used. But as we saw Ayuk get incorporated back into the offense, as we saw Deebo Samuel start to take some snaps out of the backfield, Deebo's target count plummeted, and he was really saving his fantasy performances through rushing touchdowns. And so if you don't have that in 2022, I think that hurts his value. And then Trey Lance is the other wild card. I mean, Trey Lance, is going to throw it 25, 30 times a game with a good defense? Like, the target volume just isn't going to be there in this offense. They draft another running back in Tyrion Davis-Price. Trey Lance is going to run the ball near the goal line as well. So the touchdown opportunities start to dwindle because I think if Trey Lance threw 25 touchdowns this year, it would be a remarkable passing season for him. It's probably going to be somewhere around 20. And you've got George Kittle. You've got the guys I just laid out, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel. Those have to be divided up in some way, shape, or form. So for Deebo Samuel, it's just tough for me to project him having double-digit touchdowns this season. I do think he gets over 1,000 yards, but it's just going to be uphill sledding for him to have any kind of to sniff the season he had in 2021. And for that reason, I do think his value is going to drop as the season goes along. I would love him if he was more like wide receiver. We have him at wide receiver 11. I'd probably have him more like wide receiver, 12 to 15. I probably would bump him down a couple spots. And if he was at that value, I'd be all in. But if you can sell him and get the kind of deals you're talking about, downgrade to a DK Metcalf, who I may rather have anyway, and then pick up a draft pick, or down tier to a Cortland Sutton and pick up a high value draft pick, like that's definitely the kind of deal you should be doing. And you should be moving off Deebo Samuel before the 2022 season kicks off.
We saw how decimated that backfield was, where it was Elijah Mitchell, a 6th-round pick, and nobody else. They had to use Deebo on the ground. What are the odds of the stars aligning like that again?
Even if they do, it won't happen, because that almost led to him forcing his way out. They're not going to do it. I just don't think. And
to add to that point too, Deebo is at mandatory minicamp, but what I'm reading right now from RotoBaller is that he's there, but he's not in uniform. He's running off the side of the field. He did formally request a trade this offseason. So it just feels like something has to give with Deebo Samuel. Let's talk about another high-end wide receiver. And I can't believe, how am I always like 10 spots below consensus, if not more, on this guy? Jaylen Waddle, keep trade cut, wide receiver 7 right now. That's absolutely insane to me. I thought I had come full circle on Waddle, right? I hated him as a prospect, but liked him in redraft. Really lucked out on grabbing him in some spots over the year. Ends up having that monster target share, monster reception season, sets the rookie record for receptions in year one with the high-end draft capital, shows his yards after the catch ability. It's like we haven't even seen him fully unlocked yet. And I'm like, great, I'm finally in on Waddle. And I look here, wide receiver 7. That's so hard for me to wrap my head around, because not only is there some question marks about Miami now and this offense looking more like San Francisco with Mike McDaniel being brought in, but the Tyreek Hill contract. This is absolutely brutal. A 4-year, $120 million contract with Miami for Tyreek Hill includes a $25.5 million signing bonus and $72.2 million guaranteed. They do not have an out in this contract until 2026. Let that sink in. Waddle is going to be in an offense competing for targets from a not prolific quarterback until 2026. Now, there could be some turnover at the quarterback spot. Maybe they get a rookie next year. Maybe they trade up in the first round. But even then, it's going to be Tyreek Hill first. Don't you agree, Alex, based on what he's put up?
100%.
The contract that they gave him? I like the long-term outlook. I love Waddle as a player. And he even proved a lot of us wrong that he can be a target magnet. He's not just a deep threat in year one. So you add in a target magnet, freak athlete. I'm in on the player. I just can't get my head around the situation and this price.
I agree. And honestly, it's similar to the Deebo Samuel situation, because another player in Waddle that we both love, but I just can't see him having as good of a season as he had in 2021, even though he was a rookie, because you bring in Tyreek Hill and you're bumping him back to the number 2 spot. And I know we love number 2s across the league. We love T. Higgins, even though Jamar Chase is there as kind of this 1A, 1B. But the difference is, like, the Bengals they were top 10 in points per game last season. They're passing the ball for, 260 yards a game, where the Miami Dolphins are only scoring 20 points a game, a full touchdown less per game. They're passing it for, 60, 70 yards less per week. So there's just less volume to go around in this passing offense. And to say Jaylen Waddle needs to be the wide receiver 7 in Dynasty is honestly saying that you are projecting Tua Tagovailoa to make a Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow type leap in his career, which is it possible? Sure. Is it likely? No. So Tua is the key here. He's going to have to step up in a massive way for Jaylen Waddle to return on even top 10 dynasty value over the next several seasons. And yes, Jaylen Waddle's young. There's a chance when he's going into his second contract, A, he switches teams, B, by that point, maybe Tyreek Hill isn't there and Waddle is still only 26 years old and he's put up several 1,000-yard seasons. That's possible. But the whole point of this exercise is like right here, right now, Jaylen Waddle shouldn't be a wide receiver 7. I would rather move off of him than this season when Tyreek Hill is the 1 and Jaylen Waddle has a worse season, or maybe even in 2023, go buy him back for a fraction of the price and you're all set. So it's just another one of those situations where I think at wide receiver 7, there's not really any room for that value to increase in a dynasty league, but there is tons of opportunity for it to absolutely plummet and you're caught holding the bag.
There's some other receivers that are in this range that I'm smashing on over Jaylen Waddle right now. Michael Pittman being one of those names.
Yes.
Would love to have a 24-year-old outside alpha X receiver that broke out all over the place in 2021 than Jaylen Waddle. Same thing with Rashad Bateman. From that same draft class, also a first-round wide receiver, now in a clear target funnel situation with Hollywood Brown gone out of Baltimore. I think where the questions start to come up for me is like, okay, Drake London or Jaylen Waddle, I'm going Waddle there. But the fact that it's even a conversation is a little bit concerning to me. Alex, where's kind of the cutoff for you? Like, I have him behind Terry McLaurin, behind Chris Godwin, behind even Tyreek Hill. Where are you at on Waddle from a rankings perspective?
I think he's right in that range. To me, he's more of that wide receiver 15 to 18. I think you said it best. Honestly, Drake London, I might take the shot on him ahead of Waddle. I know the draft capital is very similar, but situation has to play a part in this, and London can step right into a target funnel situation with he and Kyle Pitts as the only names in Atlanta. So there's veteran names I like, Devontae Adams, obviously Cooper Kupp. Yeah, even a Tyreek Hill I'm going to have in front of him. But even some of these guys that are 24, 25 years old, I've showed us a little something. I'd probably go ahead and prefer over Jaylen Waddle right now, even though he's a couple years younger. And you said it. I mean, the Deebo, Michael Pittman, DJ Moore, Deontay Johnson, Chris Godwin. I'm taking that tier of guys over Jaylen Waddle right now as well. So another situation where there's just so much room for Jaylen Waddle's value to decline. And
what is this offense going to be with Mike McDaniel? This is a guy who was controlling the offense in San Francisco with Shanahan, bottom 3 in pass plays per game every year that McDaniel was there, bottom 10 in pace of play. We've seen what they try to do addressing the running back position. This front office seems determined to make Tua work, even if they have to hide his flaws by bringing in a rushing first offensive strategy. They signed Chase Edmonds. They bring in Raheem Mostert. They bring in Sony Michel. Myles Gaskin's still there. And I actually think they have a lot of depth on this roster as well. Salvon Ahmed, Garrett Dokes. I think we will see those names on waiver wires. We're going to see them in DFS this year if injuries and things like that break their way. There's just so much concern, short-term and long-term for me, with Waddle right now at this wide receiver 7 cost. But Alex, last name that we'll touch on here, and I think we might get into a little debate on this one. I sold him in a deal today because I'm going all in on my boy, Courtland Sutton. Sutton's turning in one of those my guys for me this year. I somehow seem to be way above consensus, even though it was like nothing but positive thing after positive thing has happened for Sutton. He's gotten the extension. Russell Wilson's brought in long-term. This is going to be Russell Wilson's wide receiver 1 over the next couple of years.
Yep.
3-4 years. So I'm all in on Sutton. But part of the deal, I traded Brandon Cooks and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. CEH is who we want to talk about here. But I moved those 2 guys for Courtland Sutton. CEH right now is the keep trade cut RB29, which is a massive fall from grace. He was the RB9 in keep trade cut as of a year ago. And even with this value being so low, initially I was like, okay, look, the value is so low that I'm willing to buy Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He might be a value. I mean, I got him as the RB34 at the 1104 in a recent startup that we did. That I think he was truly a value there. But it was because he was even below that RB29 range going after the Dameon Pierces of the world. He went behind Ramondre Stevenson and Damian Harris, went after Rashad Penny, went after Devin Singletary, who everyone has continually comped to Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I think there's some good stretches still within CEH, but it just comes down to, will he ever be what we wanted him to be when he got drafted in the first round to Kansas City? All the Brian Westbrook comps that everyone was throwing out there. Oh, he's going to be this passing game stud. We have not seen it. And so while I think he's a fine depth piece for your roster, if he's outside the top 24 running backs, he's still not a guy that I'm actively acquiring. The saving grace for CEH right now is just that first-round draft capital. It's just like the Chiefs have to find a way to make that value work that they invested into CEH, and I'm not really seeing it. I'll get into some of the snap share and things like that, but Alex, where are you at on CEH at RB29?
I think it's actually a pretty fair value for CEH, and here's the thing. I don't think CEH is very good. In Dynasty, I hate CEH, so I think we agree on that. But I actually think CEH is one of these players that might be this kind of value arbitrage play because from what I see and what I hear, the consensus is that CEH is total garbage. He's totally washed. No one wants any piece of him, and you telling me where you just got him in a draft, I think defines that perfectly. But I honestly wouldn't be surprised if 2022 is the best season of Clyde Edwards-Helaire's career because to me, he is a prime redraft play. I've been scooping him in best ball leagues for his current value, and I just think he's going to have a decent season, like an RB2 level season with maybe a couple decent weeks where he scores touchdowns. And to me, if someone is selling him for pennies on the dollar in your league, I think you might as well try to scoop him up, see if he has a couple big weeks for the Chiefs early on, and then trade him and flip him and get someone actually good or get some future draft capital. But at the same time, if you have him and there's an opportunity to sell for any kind of value, like you obviously used him to go get a guy that you wanted in the long term, like this time next year, you do not want to have Clyde Edwards-Helaire on your roster. But if you can buy him and resell him before that at some point during the season, I think it presents a good opportunity. I'll go into it in a little bit why I think he's going to be good in redraft this year. But Steph, what do you think? I mean, do you think he's going to have a good season this year? It sounds like you're totally out, but I think there might be an opportunity to actually have his value increase from where it is right now and get more if you just wait a couple months and sell him, in October.
So last year, the snap share was low down the stretch for CEH, in part to a sprained MCL he suffered in week 5 against the Bills. He landed on IR. He missed 5 games. He was hurt. But even before the injury, he was on pace to be RB29. That's exactly where he's being valued right now in Keep Trade Cut. He hadn't had a pop game yet through 5 weeks. My concern is that he's stuck at RB29. Because even as a rookie, 58% snap share drops down to 51% in year 2, even when healthy. Is there truly a path for CEH to get more snaps, to get high-value touches? And my initial thought was, look, they brought in Ronald Jones. Ronald Jones has shown that he can't demand work in the passing game, even though I think you and I are both slightly above consensus on his skill set. It's just he's not going to be a trusted pass-catching running back. I think that's why you're seeing Isaiah Pacheco, Jerrion Ealy. Jerick McKinnon's unsigned, but they may re-sign him at 30 years old for the Chiefs. Like, they keep trying to address this pass-catching running back skill set. I'm reading the writing on the wall, which is they don't trust Clyde Edwards-Helaire to produce in the passing game. They didn't do it year 1. They didn't do it year 2. He just hasn't done it. And I think a lot of it has to come down to his size. He's getting pushed around at the line of scrimmage. He's not, on platform ready to receive the ball quick, on top of the fact that Mahomes is looking to make the big plays every time he drops back. The only path that I see for CEH to get more snaps, to be this RB2 a lot of us want him to be, is he has to develop this passing game role. Or a passing game role has to develop for him. Because there's no guarantee that he's going to get goal line work. He actually has gotten less goal line work the longer he's played. They don't trust CEH on the goal line. He gets barely any goal line snaps. They were giving Darrell Williams the ball. They were giving Tyreek Hill jet sweeps when they were in the red zone. He has to find a way to get high-value touches, and I just don't see it. And I know Ronald Jones, he fumbles near the goal line a bunch. Like, okay, still. Like, I still want to read the writing on the wall with what the GM is telling us in Kansas City. It's that they don't trust CEH. That's why they're bringing all these names in. And even the rookie year that CEH had, 14 carries, 4 targets a game, that's the Michael Carter rookie year, but that doesn't guarantee you anything. And it's not like he's been this, hey, he's in Kansas City, so he's going to get all these touchdowns. 6 touchdowns both seasons. I know there's no Tyreek Hill. Travis Kelce's older. They bring in Sky Moore. They bring in Juju. Those guys can flourish near the line of scrimmage. So unless it's below that RB29 value, I'm not taking the shot on CEH. He's an RB4 to me on my roster, and I'm not going to pay up to go get him. The question for me is, would you trade a 2023 second for Clyde Edwards-Helaire right now? And my answer is I would only do it if I knew, right, that second wasn't going to be an early to mid. Like, it has to be a late second for me.
I'd take CEH. I think it's actually a fair value. And there's a chance this time next year, I actually believe, where I would probably rather have the 2023 pick. But I just believe there's going to be a time during the season, barring injury, that you can get more for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Probably not a first. You think he can be that Devin Singletary? But maybe 2 seconds, maybe get a second plus something. And you said it best. It's got to be the passing game because he's undersized. He's not good near the goal line. He can't run well between the tackles. He's slow, so he can't get outside. It's like, why was this guy a first-round pick? But it's got to be in the passing game. The Chiefs have averaged 109 targets to the running back position over the last 3 seasons. That's pretty high. It's in the top third of the league. And if you look at this offense, 337 vacated targets. Obviously, they brought in a lot of new names to address that. But 77 of those vacated targets are at the running back position. So there is a ton of opportunity for running back targets. Ronald Jones is not catching more than probably 20 passes this season. It's actually going to be funny. Ronald Jones, there's going to be a game where he fumbles in the first quarter and he just takes his cleats off. He packs it in for the game. He's like, there's no way I'm going back in the game. And it's like, no. The Bruce Arians doghouse does not matter in Kansas City, and you're actually going right back out there. But I think the goal line upside is low. I do think it's going to be Rojo. Even Derek Gore was used around the goal line. So CEH, you're probably looking at 6 to 8 touchdowns between his rushing and receiving ability. But he's got to get the targets. And if he does in a good offense and he can have 1,000 total yards, if he can have 50 receptions on the season, that's pushing it, but it's possible. And, those 6 to 8 touchdowns, he's going to be an RB2. And someone out there is going to say, hey, I see CEH putting up numbers in the Chiefs offense. I'm back in, which I think is a mistake. So if you could get a decent offer for him now, if you roster him, I'd take it. Otherwise, I would hold. Guys I would rather have in this range, I'd rather have James Conner, even though he is older. I'd rather have Elijah Mitchell. I'd rather have James Cook. I'd rather have Miles Sanders. But I would take CEH over Tony Pollard. I would take him over Damian Harris. I would take him over Kareem Hunt, just because I think there might be an opportunity for some upside there. And one last thing I want to mention while we're on the topic, and this is why I'm kind of overall out on CEH long-term, is because age does not matter over a player being good at football. Because so often in Dynasty, we say, oh, this guy's 22 or 23. I want him over the 25-year, 26-year-old guy. But that doesn't mean that 23-year-old is going to be relevant longer than the 26-year-old is. 22-year-old Kerryon Johnson was headed into a make-or-break season in Detroit, and Melvin Gordon was 27 years old at the time, heading to Denver. And at the time, I bet every single Dynasty player, myself included, would have rather had 22-year-old Kerryon Johnson that had showed some flashes, had good draft capital, and just had some bad injury luck over a 27-year-old Melvin Gordon over the hump, going to a new team, didn't get a big contract. And 2 years later, look at who is still relevant and had back-to-back RB2 seasons, and look at who feels like he's been irrelevant forever. So that's just one reminder of age matters, but if a player's not good, it doesn't matter. So you can flame out so quickly in this league and become a backup on your second contract, especially at the running back position. So guys like CEH, guys like Antonio Gibson, guys like Miles Sanders could have less fantasy relevant seasons left in their career than the Leonard Fournettes, than the Nick Chubbs, than the James Connors. Just because they're 3 years younger doesn't mean they're going to have fantasy relevance for a longer period of time. So that's why with these guys, especially in their 3rd or 4th year, if they haven't really showed it in a big way at the running back spot, they're looking for that second contract soon. You have to pick a side. You have to say, are they good at football, or are they probably going to be replaced? And with guys like Antonio Gibson and Miles Sanders, I think we've seen enough flashes of talent. That's why I am apt to believe in them long-term, where with CEH, he just has honestly been bad, and he's going to be replaced. And I don't know if he's going to be relevant when he leaves Kansas City. So just something to remember. Guys like Phillip Lindsay, James Robinson, and Michael Carter are recent examples of guys that all had really strong seasons, all were really young. They didn't have the draft capital, but they got replaced so easily. And if Clyde Edwards-Helaire doesn't have a big season in this make-or-break year, it could be the same story for him.
I'm putting CEH behind the high-value handcuffs, behind the Tony Pollards,
wow,
behind the Rashad Whites, behind.
Yeah, I'd take White. I'd take Isaiah Spiller probably.
Because, look, if CEH, let's just say Rojo goes down, Derek Gore goes down, all these rookies they brought in go down. Do they give CEH the RB1 workload? I don't believe they do, and they've showed multiple times over that they're not going to do that. So give me the upside on a guy like Rachaad White, who we could see with 15 carries, 6 targets a game, should Fournette go down. So that's where I can't get excited about Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And this is a guy that I was in on in years prior just because of the draft capital. But at some point, we have to let that go. And I think at this point, we've seen enough through 2 seasons, especially for running backs. They burn and churn the position in the NFL. It's just the way it is. He's a guy I'm willing to get out of as soon as possible for a second-round pick or something similar. But, Alex, I think that's it for today's show. 6 players that we touched on. If y'all agree, disagree, let us know in the comments down below. If you like what we do here on the channel, a like and a sub greatly appreciated. Join that free Discord to keep the conversation going with us. Follow us on Twitter, and we'll see you next time. Peace.
Peace.